So the gravel mesh reinforced path is now in. There's a link coming up on screen now and in the description below this video. And the next job I was desperate to do was to install a hot and cold tap system outside the house so that I could shower my dog with warm water this winter after our runs or walks, rather than having to douse her with freezing cold water out the hosepipe. So in today's video, I'm going to show you exactly how I've done this, how I've transformed my slightly amateurish original plan with the professional help of James from Plumber Parts, and I'm, as usual, going to show you all the mistakes I've made along the way. So let's have a quick look at today's toolkit, and you'll find links to everything in the description below this video. We've got the outdoor tap hose temperature mixer, SDS drill with 16 and 24mm diameter drill bits, 2 brass wall plates with 15mm copper tails, 2 brass bib taps. I bought double check valve taps but ended up using standard ones for reasons I'll explain, but the double check ones won't go to waste. 2 15mm full bore isolating valves to replace the old valves, and 2 additional ones with butterfly handles to isolate the water to the new taps. Pipe clips, 2 solder ring copper tees, 3 solder ring 90° elbows, 2 compression 90° elbows, 2 drain off valves, 2 check valves, more on those in a bit, my trusty Bucko 15mm pipe cutter, some 15mm copper pipe from my spares bucket, jointing compound, PTFE tape, wire wool, Rothenberger propane gas torch Allen cylinder, not essential because you can use compression joints, but I just love soldering pipes. Pipe bender, also non-essential because I could have used these obtuse elbows. Drill bits and drill driver, these universal drill bits are particularly good, and my marksman marker. And finally, gun grade expanding foam along with cleaner. Again, not essential, but I found it useful. So here's the outdoor space where I wanted to install the taps. The main reason being the kitchen sink is immediately behind this wall, giving me the perfect opportunity to reroute the hot and cold water through the wall. Before I started, I thought I'd tidy up the wall by scraping off the remains of some climbing ivy with a wire brush attachment on my drill, because I wasn't getting anywhere scraping it manually with a wire brush. The plan was to paint the wall after doing all the messy drilling work, just as well as it turned out. The plumbing under the kitchen sink was done by a local company back in 2014 when we moved into the cottage and had a new central heating system and kitchen installed. It was a bit shoddy, with the original sink drain hole not filled in and none of the pipes clipped against the wall. I didn't really give much thought to the plumbing, other than the fact that I'd need 2 holes drilled in the wall in a position that would be convenient to work on inside the kitchen cupboard and also at a reasonable height outside. So I drilled the initial hole from the inside and was too lazy to look for a narrower drill bit than this 16mm SDS bit. This was an error because my Tyrolean render is notoriously liable to blow off dramatically if not carefully drilled, and this time round it didn't disappoint. Let's watch that again as a close-up. No! Interested to see how I recover from this one. But with the external position now marked, I could drill the second hole from the outside, 180mm apart from the first, and this time starting with a much narrower drill bit, guaranteeing a much cleaner hole, before moving back up to the 16mm bit. A bit of spare 15mm copper pipe just about squeezed through, but I wasn't happy with how tight a fit it was, so I enlarged the hole to 24mm and would find out if that was a good idea or not shortly. So I had a large hole to repair, and as the Tyrolean had separated from the render beneath, I decided to prime it with watered down PVA, not required for the filler, but a useful way of gluing the 2 layers back together. I then mixed up some of the excellent two-pray masonry repair filler you might have seen me use in the summer. There's a link to that video on screen now, and tooled it into the gap, propping it up around the hole with a little pipe and stick contraption, and texturing it to a Tyrolean type finish with an old toothbrush, which gives a much better finish than that other patch repair you will already have seen on this wall from the old sink drain pipe. The following morning I could remove the pipe, fine-tune the opening with a countersink and a masonry drill bit, and the repair was complete. Next I needed to mark the position of the wall plate screw holes on the wall, which I did with the brilliant Marksman marking pen, and carefully drilled the holes, starting with one of those 5mm universal bits and working up to the 7mm diameter required for the brown plugs I decided to use. And as the brass screws I had lying around have quite a wide neck, I even slightly widened the start of the hole to 8mm to minimise the chance of the screws blowing the render. As with the 24mm diameter hole for the water pipes, the screw holes were quite close to the edge. One hole on the repaired section did blow, so I increased the angle of the hole and repaired the surface with the Metaset epoxy resin crack repair filler that you'll also see in that crack repair video I just linked to. And then it was time to give the wall a quick lick of the brilliant water repellent, self-cleaning, breathable Emperor paint that I used on the front of the house. There's a link to that video on screen now. I'll finish repairing the rendering and properly paint this section of the house in the spring, so watch out for a video on that. With the paint dry, it was time to screw in place the wall plates and tails, which by now I had measured and cut to size. And I decided at this point to spray some expanding foam into the hole between the pipe as I fed it in, an advantage there of that wider 24mm diameter hole, just to give the pipe a little bit of protection from frost in the winter. I generally find slot head screws quite tricky to drive home without camming out, but after all this careful prep and the screws ideally suited to the wall plugs, they tightened up beautifully with no sign of cracking even on the repaired section. I was planning to tee off the hot and cold water pipes straight through the wall, a bit like this. But then luckily James from Plumber Parts, professional plumber and YouTube legend, intervened with a spot of advice.
Hi Charlie, all looking good mate, looks like you're doing a lovely job there. Couple of little plumber tips for you man. Let's have a little look at the whiteboard, got my pen here, just going to do you a little sketch, try these ones out, alright? So we've got our hot and our cold, you're going across with the cold aren't you, through the wall, jumping over with the hot, through the wall, out to your outside tappy bit. First thing I'd say is obviously valve on each one of these, so there's any problems you can valve it off. Then a non-return valve, like that. And then a drain off as well. So in the winter, you can shut these two valves off here and then drain any water out. See you soon, mate. Have fun. Goodbye and hold tight.
I now had to find room for an isolator valve, non-return valve and drain off between the existing hot and cold feeds and the new holes, and so I came up with a plan. With the holes now drilled, I had limited space to fit all those additional components in, so I decided the first thing I needed to do was lower those two isolator valves to give me more room to play with. So after switching off the mains water stopcock and hot water, I set to work dismantling first the cold water pipes. I thought I'd properly clip the pipes to the wall while I was at it, and so I drilled and plugged the plasterboard wall for the clips, and used my 15mm Bucko pipe cutter to reduce the height of the pipe. I decided to upgrade the isolators to full bore, meaning they allow water to flow pretty much the full internal diameter of the pipe, as you see here with this old 22mm version, rather than shackling it down to the much smaller aperture I had previously. I use this Fernox jointing compound on the olives. I can't say I'm a massive fan, as possibly because the cap had a slight break in it, but the stuff is basically like silicone and keeps setting in the neck of the tube. There's me getting annoyed with it. Tightening compression joints is something you get used to with a small amount of practice. You want it reassuringly tight without over tightening, but with enough give to give it another quarter turn if required. I also cut down the length of the original pipe that teed into the dishwasher to give me more room to tee off above it for my outdoor tap. Now let's have a quick chat about deburring. When you cut a pipe with even a new, reasonably sharp pipe cutter like this, it reduces the diameter around the cut, essentially curling it in. And videos abound on YouTube showing how the turbulence created by this can produce pinholes or leaks in the pipe. Deburring takes off this lip and removes any source of turbulence. Problem is it takes time to deburr pipes, and the plumber who installed my new unvented water tank told me his boss didn't like him deburring, but clearly I'm going to. I never owned a deburring tool, so I've always done it with a razor blade, but I did cut my fingers on this job on the back of the blade, so I thought I'd buy a couple of deburring tools to show you. I had high hopes for this Silverline, but found it awkward to use and found it produced a messy end result. Much better was the razor blade type approach, and this tool produced consistently good results whilst also protecting my fingers from being cut. So the system was coming together nicely with me assembling everything dry first, and when I was ready I would solder a section before moving on. Now the plumbing police out there will say I should have used these standard couplers for which you need solder rather than these Yorkshire fittings, which, as I said at the start, have a little ring of solder inside. In short, these are viewed as a much more DIY option. A lot of plumbers are using press fit now, but the machine is over £1,000, pricing this option out for us DIYers, and a few people on my Discord forum have experimented with TOOLKIT fittings recently, a metal version of push fit. It'd be good to hear what you use in the comments section. But I've got to say I love using these Yorkshire fittings. Quick clean of the pipe with some wire wool. And there's some flux on the part of the pipe that's going to be pushed into the joint. Then a wise man once told me to wipe off the flux residue. And then a wet kitchen cloth wrapped around that old messy joint the previous plumbers did to stop the solder melting when I solder the new joint. Oh, and this is a soldering mat to protect what's beneath it. I'll put a link in the description. And then the joyful process of heating up the pipe until the solder starts to flow. And I find working from one joint to the next is the best way to approach this, as when the solder flows in the first joint, the coupler is sufficiently hot that when you heat the next joint, the solder flows almost immediately. And here it is slotted into place. Now, a plumber I know, not James, has suggested my assembly is a bit compression joint heavy. Well, I wanted to put a 90-degree compression joint on the tails coming into the cupboard from outside in case I ever needed to remove and relocate them. Also, I'd gladly have used solder joints, but I'm not aware of any solder joints for isolator valves, non-return or double check valves and drain-offs. But let me know in the comments section if I'm wrong about this. I thought things were going so well, and then disaster struck. Ah, look what I've gone and done. I've put the non-return valve before the drain off, so nothing's going to drain off. So I'm going to have to flip it over somehow. So what do we mean about these non-return valves? Well, these were brought into plumbing to stop fluid flowing in the wrong direction. Particularly important where, like here, you've got a pipe that supplies drinking water as well as water to clean that dog. Now, James and I referred to non-return valves, but these days the job is done typically by check valves, which are a more comprehensive way of stopping fluids going the wrong way. Having initially bought a double check valve tap, which would have removed the need for this little chap, I decided having the valve in the tap might be a problem for drain off, as I'd want to open the tap fully before draining the pipe. So I decided to install a standard tap instead and put the valve further down the pipework. So I undid the compression joints and replaced a section of pipework to relocate the valve in the correct position and started redoing the plumbing to add the isolation valve, check valve and drain off for the hot water pipe, using my pipe bending tool to add a slight bend in this section to take the hot water pipe out of the way of the cold. Don't worry if you haven't got a pipe bender, because you can use obtuse elbows like this to create the same result. But I hadn't finished there, because the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that the check valves I fitted are in fact single check. I suspect, given proximity to drinking water and the chance of detergents being involved, I should have fitted double check valves. And so for belt and braces I took the system apart yet again and installed double check valves in their place. So I've slightly angled this isolator valve so it doesn't clash. What I really love about this new system is, do you remember how much these pipes used to knock around? Well, it's completely rigid now. I haven't put any clips on here because I don't really think it's necessary. And yeah, really happy. And I think it's minimised the knocking noise we used to get from the dishwasher when it called for mains cold water. And you might also have noticed I've sprayed some expanding foam in that hole and around the tails, just to prevent any issues with cold bridging and condensation getting into that space behind the dot and dab plasterboard. With all the internal plumbing done, it was simply a job of installing those two bib taps with some liberal use of PTFE tape around the threads to make them watertight. I was pretty much done, and all that remained was to install that outdoor tap hose temperature mixer. This is the kit I bought, which I have to say I assumed was a Hoselock product, given the branded hose pipe, but in putting this vid together I realised it's actually a totally bespoke product, the brainchild of a couple who couldn't find a kit on the market to give their dog a warm shower after muddy walks. I'll put a link in the description below my vid. You could of course make up your own shower from the individual components, but I'm pretty sure this is the only actual kit available on the market. The PTFE tape was also pretty essential here to create a watertight join between the tap thread and the brass base plate. On connecting the temperature mixer I found this leaked pretty badly, and so a quick application of PTF tape on this too, and the whole assembly was completely watertight. You've got some quite nice adjustable spray settings on the nozzle head. And after going for a run together this morning, this video wouldn't be complete without bringing on DIY Dog to demonstrate the mixer in action. And with that water lovely and warm, there was none of her usual cowering away from the hosepipe. Isn't that lovely? Shake! So that's it from me today and from DIY Dog. It has been a long video this, hasn't it? For something which should be really straightforward, installing an outdoor hot and cold water feed. But as with so many of my videos, I started this off not really knowing a great deal about the subject, and I've ended up learning quite a lot, which I hope is inspiration for you if you're undertaking a challenge like this. Where are you backing off to? As I said earlier, details of everything that I've talked to today, including links to this mixer, will be in the description below the video, which of course you can access on your smartphone by clicking on More, and on your PC by clicking on the Show More button. What else have I got to do? A lot of you will be probably thinking showering mud into this new grid mesh structure isn't the best idea, so I need to think about how I can minimize that mud going through here. Maybe I just extend the hose on that so I can shower off the path. If you've got any comments or suggestions on that, do let me know in the comments section below. And so now with this challenge over, I turn my attention to the next one, which is constructing a big outdoor log store. My version of something like this. Hopefully that will be with you by next weekend, if not, certainly in a couple of weeks' time. So keep an eye out for that. And in the meantime, many thanks for supporting my channel. You can find me on Patreon, where for £5 a month you can access behind the scenes stuff, and best of all, my Discord chat forum. And of course, I'm on there every day too. And finally, if you're new to my channel, it would mean so much to me to have you subscribe. You can do that by clicking on the link here, and don't forget to click the bell notification icon so you get notified of all my future uploads. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.